And or is this not attractive for VCs to come in and exploit, either because it's a small enough market or because we have some sort of wedge, we have an opinionated way of doing something, we have a differentiator, or we're just really going to carve out this specific feature set, and that's the thing we're going to be leading with, that we know is not going to turn into a ginormous opportunity, but it's going to be big enough for us.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Corey Haines, who's got his fingers in many pots. He's built SwipeFiles, SwipeWell, and is working on many other stealth projects. He also works as the head of marketing for SavvyCal, which is a Calendly competitor. Corey is an expert in the marketing SaaS space, especially for bootstrap companies. And through today, you're going to learn many key pieces of advice that are going to help you succeed in building your own business. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Corey. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's I've been a long-time listener, reader of Entrepreneur's Handbook as well, so it's an honor and excited to dig in.
I'm sure many of the people listening today are curious about what took you down the path you're going on now, where you've got multiple different companies you've started up and you're testing different ideas. But where did it all start from?
Really, actually, if we wanted to go all the way back, it started on a road trip with a friend out to Arizona. I'm in San Diego, California. It's a bunch of our friends graduated high school and then they all moved away. And so me and one of my other friends who stayed in San Diego did a road trip out to Arizona. And, when you have 5 hours to kill on a really long straight road all the way through the desert, you get to deep life questions like, what's your plan and what do you want to do in life? What do you want to achieve? And how do you see things playing out in the next, 5, 10, 20 years? And at that time, I was kind of going down this path of finance and accounting and wanting to get into that world, maybe becoming like a financial advisor. My friend was very entrepreneurial. He was all into rich dad, poor dad and building businesses and real estate and forging his own path. And he's very extroverted and salesman-like. And so I told him my plan of getting a 9-to-5 job and then retiring after 40 years. It was like, that's it. And at the time I was actually really offended. And it took me a while to kind of like cool down from that a little bit. And, I would kind of ask him why, and like, why is that such a, like, that's it? Like, why can't that be a fulfilling path? And of course there is nothing objectively wrong with that path. But after talking, it really opened my eyes to, I think, what was possible, what was out there. And then it's a little bit like the forbidden fruit, like once you get a taste of it, once you kind of see what's out there, once I started listening to some podcasts, reading some books, learning about some people in particular and their past, their journeys, then I just felt like, well, geez, I can't not do this. Like I have to go down this path. This is just a much more exciting, personally fulfilling path that I want to go down. And then I can always go back to the traditional 9-to-5 accounting, finance job if I really wanted to at that time. So anyways, at that point, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to do my own thing. I had no idea what that meant until I landed a job at a startup here in San Diego, a SaaS startup, B2B, learned about the business model, started doing a lot of marketing for them, which I sort of just fell into. And it was at that time I realized like, oh, this is a really, really cool space. I'm a total nerd I've always been a nerd for apps, technology, and engineering feats and innovations. And so seeing B2B SaaS and the way that businesses are getting real value and utility out of it, and you pay a subscription and it's infinitely scalable and you have great gross margins, I was like, this is the business that I want to get into. And so from that point on, it was sort of my end game to get into SaaS, and everything now has sort of just been like practice, where I'm learning someone else's dime, where I'm building out the skills and the practice to be able to build a SaaS company of my own.
What made you leave the SaaS company you were working for? Like, what was the trigger? It was like, now I'm going to do it for myself. Now I'm going to build my own businesses.
So the first startup I worked for was called Cordial, and I started as an intern, and then I worked my way up to being a marketing manager, and then ended up specializing in content marketing and being the content marketing lead. And I knew that there was a lot more to learn, and there was a lot more out there that I needed to get my hands on. And I basically kind of stumbled into an opportunity to apply for a job as the head of growth at Baremetrics. And Baremetrics served founders and operators of SaaS companies. And so I thought, well, what better way for me to learn the business of SaaS really intimately than to be able to get an inside look into the actual metrics and financials of SaaS companies, work with the customers, talk about it. I would basically be forced to learn about, how do you run a SaaS company through osmosis from our customers and through everything that all the content we're producing and putting out there. After going through Baremetrics, then I really felt like, all right, this is the last full-time job that I want to have. I think I have a lot of the skills that I need personally. I wasn't like ready quite yet, so I had to bridge the gap somehow. But I knew that basically that was like, I didn't want to go any further that way, because I think the further you get into, a traditional job, you become more senior, you make more money, you get better benefits, you get more comfortable, life sets in. I don't have a mortgage yet, I don't have kids yet, I'm married, but like I knew that I wanted, if I'm going to take this risk, I need to do it sooner rather than later, because the longer I wait, the harder it gets basically to leave. And so after that, I knew, okay, this is the last full-time job I want to have, and I'm going to start taking these risks and sort of make the leap, as it were.
I completely relate to that. So I left my job after 7 years to do what I'm doing now. And it was really hard to do that, because I knew if I stayed for another 6 months or another year, I'd get that next promotion, and then I could be pretty cushy for the rest of my life. But is that what I wanted from life? And I had to make that kind of identity decision of what is it that I want to do. And I made the decision to go and do my own thing, and I haven't regretted it yet. And you said you had to tide things over initially once you left Baremetrics. What did you do there? Because obviously a big concern of many people when they start to become entrepreneurs, especially when they've worked full-time jobs before, is that income side of how do you can't build something from zero and straight away have great revenue. So how do you tide yourself over? How do you make it as secure as possible, considering the world you're going into?
Well, I want to put a preface and a disclaimer on it that this is all in the context of me wanting to bootstrap, essentially, or to use as minimal funding as possible. I also don't come from extravagant means or have a lot of rich uncles or other places where I could, easily fundraise. I think that when either when you have those sources, or you've built up a big bankroll for yourself, or if you really want to go down the VC route and you want to raise a bunch of money and go through a few rounds, you don't have to do things like I did, because you can make more of like a clear-cut jump from your full-time job to maybe a couple months buffer where you're fundraising and you're working on your next idea, and then you raise that money, you start paying yourself a salary, and now you've given yourself a job effectively in your new company. When you're bootstrapping, you're starting from zero, then there is no money to draw from, right? And so you have to have another additional source. So my first kind of plan was I want to be able to do the same thing in, growing SaaS companies and doing marketing, but I just can't be doing it in a full-time job. I need to open up at least half of my schedule to be able to just have the time available for these other projects. So I started consulting. At first, I started doing a lot of coaching. I think at one point I was working with over a dozen different SaaS companies, doing weekly and bi-weekly calls, strategy sessions, being really hands-on with what they were doing. That got really, really tiring, especially basically 2 of my days were fully booked back-to-back with meetings all day long from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I'm very introverted. Also, just meetings are just not my jam. And I would much rather do things asynchronously for me to really mull things over. So then I actually got an opportunity to do marketing for a company called SavvyCal, which is a Calendly competitor. I listened to the podcast of Derek Reimer, the founder. He asked if I was interested in doing marketing. I was one of the first customers of SavvyCal. And so basically worked out a position where I could work part-time, 10 to 15 hours a week doing marketing for SavvyCal. But I would essentially make the same as I was before working full-time. So now I can kind of check the box on the financials, but now I can also open up another 3 days of my week essentially to work on whatever else it is that I wanted to do. That led me to really put a lot of time into building SwipeFiles, which is what I call my launchpad business. So that's now like the next step from consulting, where actually now today, I could quit the consulting if I want to. I'm kind of having too much fun, and we have some ambitious goals that I want to see through with SavvyCal. But with SwipeFiles, it's kind of a launchpad business, basically content-based business where there's a membership, includes a community, courses, live office hours, access to me asynchronously, of course, not in a coaching capacity or a consulting capacity, but really just answering questions in the community, DMs, emails. I use ZipMessage a lot for async video communications and tutorials and stuff like that. The combination of SwipeFiles membership and sponsorships, that has allowed me to basically also unlock my finances to be able to work on something else if I need to, which the next step is SaaS. So that's kind of where I'm at now, is in the very early stages. But when I first left my full-time job, it was, how do I unlock my time doing the same exact thing, but for the same amount of money, half time? And then now with SwipeFiles, my Launchpad business, where basically now I'm completely separate from any sort of employment. I can do my own thing, but I can still have the revenue to pay the bills and keep afloat.
How did you decide to make SwipeFiles that Launchpad business? What was the logic behind that, or why did you pick that idea?
There's just only a couple types of companies that and business models that really lend themselves to being a Launchpad business. The whole idea of a Launchpad business is basically to have a cash flowing business that you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on, essentially. I think that you can do a Launchpad business with a SaaS company if you're a developer, because you can build the product, get some initial traction, invest a little bit in marketing and maintenance and customer support, but then it kind of just runs on its own, and maybe you can just take the profits and pay yourself with it. But you can't really do that with a service business, of course, because that's completely tied to your time. E-commerce gets a little bit harder because it's lower margin, and especially if you're like a one-man operation, it's just a lot to handle as one person. And so I think it's hard to actually, separate yourself from the time on the business. So for me, I knew I wanted to do a content-based business where I'm selling content products, community, a membership of some sort, where I have recurring revenue still. So there's that kind of stability where I don't have to constantly be finding new customers, and I don't have to be running ads to get the amount of volume that I need, but I can just have like a 1,000 true fans who are paying enough to really get a lot of value out of it, where I can be hands-on, but also it doesn't need to be like $1 million business. It just needs to, pay for my bills here in San Diego, which is a high cost of living area, but still it's not a ton, right? It's like $150,000 a year is very comfortable. And so the content-based business with recurring revenue checks all the boxes for easy to create the products, easier for me to market because I've built a Twitter following and a newsletter, but also doesn't require a lot of my time. There's no customer support, and now I can go work on whatever else I want to.
Yeah, and you just touched on something as well that I find really interesting is, how did you build that initial Twitter following and newsletter following to market your products too? Because this is another thing that many people struggle with when they first get into this world, is you need to be able to sell to an audience who, like you said, are your 1,000 loyal fans. And a lot of people struggle with, how do I get those fans in the first place?
I'll give you a catchphrase, and it'll sound nice, but I'll explain, what it is. So basically, I think about audience building as earning trust at scale. And so if you kind of break that down into two parts, we have earning trust, and then we have at scale. So earning trust is really simple, right? You want to, what is the thing that you are an expert at, or that you have experience in, that you love talking about, that you can teach people? And then where do you show up, right? How do you earn that trust? Well, you show up in communities, you hop on calls with people, you create content, you basically just build your brand around something in particular. Of course, for me, it's B2B SaaS marketing. It's my bread and butter, what I'm super interested in. I'm just an absolute nerd for. And so all day long, I am earning trust, showing up in places like indiehackers.com and Product Hunt, and in Twitter and LinkedIn and Slack groups and Facebook groups and Telegram chats, and just always talking about being able to chip in about SaaS marketing. And every time I go on a podcast, every time I do a workshop, I always tell people, hey, go follow me on Twitter, and or go subscribe to the newsletter, SwipeFiles.com. And then the at scale part is the second part. And that's really about how do you really do this in a way that it's going to reach the masses, right? So you're not just reaching the same people all the time. And so I like to break it down from an owned, rented, and borrowed platforms. So you have your owned platforms. You're basically you have a direct relationship with your audience, and you can always tap into that same pool of people. So for me, that's a newsletter. It's like the perfect owned platform to get people into, because you just press send and everyone gets the email. There's no algorithm. There's no real blockers. There's no censorship. There's nothing that's really they can't tell you no for those people reaching your stuff, and you get good open rates, and it's a great platform to just build that trust with your audience. You have rented platforms like social media. So Twitter's the main one for me. I think Twitter has the best mechanics of any of the social media platforms because it's the most shareable, and just the way that it works between follows, but there's still the algorithm. So you'll be, it's easy to get access to other people's content who you don't follow, but also vice versa. people who don't follow you will get access to your content through retweets and comments, and the algorithm just surfacing topically relevant information and content out there. And then we have borrowed platforms. And so the borrowed platforms is really where you start to scale stuff and where you earn that trust over time, where now I'm just showing up on podcasts. I'm tapping into other people's newsletters by doing a takeover. I'm writing blog posts for other blogs and other publications, other columns. I'm speaking at events and summits, things like that, where over time, of course, now keep in mind, my Twitter following is fairly small still. It's about 16,000, but that's over about 5 years, right? So a couple thousand a year is really what it broke down to. There was no real viral moment. There was no huge spike. Today, you see that a lot more often. I've seen people shoot up from 0 to 100,000 followers in a couple of months. I'm not that person. That takes a very different playbook where you're very strategic, I'll put it that way, about the way that you're growing your audience. But I'd like to just compound, just put in the work, earn trust at scale, chip away at it over time, and eventually you end up with a large-ish audience.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point there as well, because I know what you mean about the strategies that people use to, say, grow very fast on Twitter. It can also sometimes not actually build the trust. And there is this way that you can have a huge following, but at the same time not have the trust where people actually want to buy a product from you. I think it's a mistake that people often make. For example, when you look on TikTok or look on other platforms, if you're doing something which maybe is entertaining, that doesn't necessarily translate to people then trusting your expertise. It's for you, it's going to be better, like you said, if you're maybe growing slower, but the people that are following you are more loyal and actually care about what you have to say.
Yeah, it's a matter of how deep do you want to go, right? There's a lot of Twitter followings out there that have hundreds of thousands of followers, and they're, the frameworks guy or the mental models guy or whatever it is. But like, I would never buy a product from them because I know that it's all surface level and they're sort of just stitching things together from Wikipedia and Google search results. And it's, I don't actually know if they have any expertise there. Whereas when I write an article on why, LTV to CAC is a sham and you shouldn't use it for SaaS acquisition modeling, I can talk about that because I've been there and I've done that. I've been in the trenches and I can get into all the nuances. I can talk about how to launch from product hunt. I can talk about anything in B2B SaaS marketing because I've been there. I've done the experience. I'm also sort of shown the receipts, right? I've also done this. It's not just me talking about it and sounding smart, but really I'll show you screenshots. I'll show you examples. I'll give you case studies. I'll give you detailed analysis. And that's really, like what you said, it's going to build the trust and eventually lead to some sort of, transaction, right? Or some sort of relationship rather than just a following.
And you published the Product Hunt article with us as well. And it's about how you rank like first of the month or second of the month for different products you've launched in the past. For the people listening who like one day want to launch on Product Hunt themselves, what advice would you give them?
I'll see if I can kind of distill it down to a couple of core principles. Also, so I just won't regurgitate the whole article because it's sort of a long read and better if you could just kind of go through it by yourself. The main mistakes or piece of advice I would give people is that one, you don't want Product Hunt to be your very first marketing effort. I think that's a big misnomer and definitely a big switch in the last few years. Is Product Hunt used to be like the first place that you get your users. And that was true in the past when it was less competitive. I mean, when you could sort of easily be on the first place, on the first page and, just kind of organically make your way up to the top. But now if you do that, you'll really miss out on the downstream effects of actually getting users and getting customers and getting subscribers. So I tell people that actually Product Hunt should be the very last step of your whole launch strategy. Your launch strategy should really be stretched out between early access, wait lists, alpha, beta, a public launch. You might do a launch with like an affiliate or with a partner or some sort of announcement, do a PR blast, and then you do your Product Hunt launch as like the culmination, the crescendo of your whole launch strategy. Because at that point, you have things dialed in where you know that your landing page converts, you know that your onboarding successfully makes users into customers, and you know their customers are actually getting value out of the product, and you can scale this up, right? So Product Hunt is more of you're capitalizing on all that pent up energy, but you have to build it up in the first place by everything else you're building before that. Also, because the best way you're going to get upvotes is from your own email list and your own owned, rented, and borrowed platforms. And there's nothing to draw from if you haven't gone and done the work of building those, if product hunt is the very first thing that you do for your SaaS product. So don't make product hunt your very first thing. Second piece of advice is a very like tactical, prescriptive piece of advice. A lot of people fail to follow it for whatever reason, but schedule your launch beforehand and schedule it to launch at exactly midnight Pacific time when the new day starts for product hunt. Because really what I found is that the top three, especially, really the top three, but you can even extrapolate that out to like the top 5 or even top 10 spots are won and lost within the first hour of the day. So literally from midnight to 1 a.m. Pacific time, you get those early upvotes and you establish yourself at the top of the list as the number one. And then throughout the middle of the night, you have all these people organically coming to the site who are in, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, where it's 10 a.m. for them or 12 p.m. for them, India, and then they'll be organically upvoting your post because it's already at the top. So you're not having to fight for the top. You're more playing defense, right? It's like being it's easier to fight a battle at the top of the hill because you have the upper kind of advantage. Same exact principle for product hunt. If you win that first position within the first hour, you're just playing defense the rest of the day and your life is a lot easier. So please schedule it at 12 a.m. Pacific time and then do a lot of your marketing efforts at midnight. Send the email blast out at 12:01. Schedule the tweets to go out at 12:01. Tell all your friends to upvote you at 12:01. Get all those early upvotes as early as possible. And then product hunt will kind of take care of the rest with all the rest of their organic upvotes that'll come through the site. And then maybe lastly, like really think about how to treat your listing like a landing page. You want to put a lot of thought into the video walkthrough that you do, the images that you upload, even like the tagline and the subtitle of your listing. It has to really be catchy enough for someone to click on it, right? And then you want to turn that click from the post into a visit to your website. And then, of course, you can let your website, hopefully, will do a good job of turning that visit into a subscriber or into a user or into a customer. But really think about the landing page or the listing as a landing page and having all the right ingredients of social proof, show, don't tell, be super, super prescriptive, show examples, clear copywriting rather than clever copywriting. And the listing itself, you can take it a long way. I see a lot of really bad listings, either that are like incomplete or confusing, or they just look kind of spammy. Just be honest, just be personable, and the rest will take care of itself.
And have you found when you've placed high on product hunt, that's made a big difference to your launches? Has that really accelerated them and got the word out further? Or what's the channels that have made the most difference?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think for SwipeFiles itself, so I placed number 2 of the day for SwipeFiles, and I think it was also like number 2 of the week or something like that. The day that I launched, I got 1,000 newsletter subscribers. And it's funny, actually, I didn't even realize I got that many, but there was an issue with Webflow where it wasn't sending over the subscribers over to ConvertKit. So I was like, how did I only get 50 subscribers? And then I looked in like the logs that Webflow gives you, and there was like 1,100 records in there. I was like, holy mackerel, all these people didn't actually get uploaded. For SavvyCal, I can't talk about the exact numbers, but it was very much an inflection point where like the revenue growth is kind of, flat up and to the right, kind of linear. And then product hunt, and it was just like, whoop, up and to the right even more. Now we're like exponential growth, basically. There was a step change and a huge source of growth in customers, especially if you can get featured in their newsletter. The newsletter brought 3 times as many traffic, as many visitors and signups than the actual product hunt listing the day before. And they curate the newsletter. They choose what goes in there, but normally they choose from the top 1, 2, 3 listings of the day. Especially if you have a really good landing page, really good tagline, a really good value proposition, they might choose you just because it's creative and interesting to their audience. But I think that last year when they launched, they had 750,000 subscribers. It wouldn't inspire me today. They had over 1 million. Think about reaching 1 million people. That's crazy, right? Talk about a borrowed audience. Like it can absolutely have a immense impact for your business.
You're building other businesses as well on the side, right? Where you said you've got different projects going on. What can you tell us about those and what's the motivation behind those different businesses?
Yeah, so I'm finally getting into the world of SaaS myself. It's always been my end game, as I mentioned before, but trying to figure out consulting and then building Launchpad business with SwipeFiles and trying to align the stars with the right people at the right time, building the right products. That's finally coming together now. So the hard part is that finding a technical co-founder is a lot like getting married. And I don't want to just get married to someone after our first date, right? And just go elope in Vegas, right? And just go crazy because you don't know who that person is. You don't know how you work together. You don't know it's even hard to align the right person with the right type of product. And so you might have an idea working with this person. Turns out that idea doesn't have any legs. You try to work on another idea. That idea isn't interesting to them, or it requires a very different skill set. Maybe it requires more back-end work, or requires more design and UI, or maybe it requires a desktop app and they've never built a desktop app. And so there's a lot of nuances in there. So basically my approach has been, I spun up a Notion doc. I said, hey, here's who I am. Here's what I've done. Here's who I'm looking for. And what I'm looking to do is build a small, independent, but profitable SaaS business. I don't know what it is. I'm not married to any idea. I'm basically just SaaS product agnostic. I want to find the right idea for the right person at the right time. If you know anyone who's interested in working with someone like me, who's an entrepreneur or developer and wants to build something like this, let me know. And I passed it out to all the smartest people that I know and friends and advisors and investors and said, if you know of anyone, send me a DM or an email. I'll hop on a call. And then after I've made those connections, basically worked out, okay, let's work for 3 months together. We'll build an MVP. We'll use that as like a trial period to get to know each other, see how we work together, see how it's like to build a product together. And they'll even see if this idea has any legs, right? Because we also don't want to over-engineer and go incorporate and do all these fancy stuff if there really isn't anything promising about the idea and if it turns out that no one wants it, right? So I'm doing that with several people right now, several technical co-founders potentially. One of them I can talk about that's really promising that is like the latest stage of all of them is called SwipeWell. So it's a SaaS platform to build a swipe file, which is basically marketing jargon for a collection of marketing examples and inspiration to use for later. So you can take screenshots of emails, ads, landing pages, really anything you want to use for marketing examples and for inspiration later on. And so we're inviting our first beta users there, but many more to come. I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting if they're all successful. I'm kind of anticipating some won't work out or want to move on, or there isn't a lot of legs for the product. But SwipeWell is definitely one of the more promising ones today that I can talk about.
And how are you managing your time on this? Because obviously it must be difficult to be working with so many different people on different ideas as well. And you've obviously got your other existing businesses at the same time. You've got consulting people you're still going for. Do you find it hard to kind of juggle all those different hats? It's
easier than you might think. Again, I spend about 15 hours a week on SavvyCal, and a lot of that is just, I'm choosing exactly what I think that we should do, and I'm choosing high leverage activities, things that I'm not dilly-dallying around. I'm just getting my work done or move on to the next thing, being super efficient with my time there. With SwipeFiles, things are mainly automated. I don't spend a ton of time there. Actually, my next kind of project for SwipeFiles, ironically, is a book. So it's called Founding Marketing, but that's mainly like the time that I spend in it. And I'll spend a couple hours a week just kind of repackaging, repurposing existing content that I've created for the manuscript of the book. But otherwise, I'm just chatting with people over the community, doing live office hours once a month. I've already created a lot of the content, so that's mainly just checked, mark, done. So I have another, 30-ish hours a week to work on all these new projects, all these new SaaS projects. And also for this stage, building the MVPs, there isn't a lot of work for me to do. So to be honest, as the technical co-founders, talked with all of them, like the impetus is really on them at this stage. Of course, I'm playing more like product manager, early user. I'm also getting all the early users in, getting beta users, telling friends about it, making connections, networking, et cetera, doing the copy for the landing page. But really, like, my work hasn't started on those quite yet as a job or as like a real responsibility. And so I'm just trying to chip away really small. So every day, I have a list of a couple of tasks that I choose, a couple of really high leverage things. I think given my background being in B2B SaaS marketing and now working on B2B SaaS, I know exactly what I want to do. I know the playbooks. I'm I'm honestly just really efficient with my time, just choosing exactly what to work on, what not to do, and just cranking it out because I enjoy the work and I like doing it.
And on that, you said about earlier on, you chose to do bootstrapping rather than going down the venture route. What was the reasoning behind that? Why did you decide to do the bootstrapping way?
Philosophically, I don't think that most businesses should be venture backed. Venture backed basically means, well, it can mean a couple of things. I think that the industry's come a long way, but more recently, basically, once you commit down the venture backed route, then it's either $1 billion exit or bust. You're IPOing, you're getting acquired by a strategic company, another big publicly traded company, or you're fizzling out and you're turning off the lights. That to me, like neither of those sound like good outcomes to me. What I'm really about is just creating really cool, useful stuff, seeing it exists in the world, being proud of the work, and then continuing to make it better. And so for me, going more like the profitable, sustainable route is what I'm a fan of. I'm a fan of a lot of the sort of bootstrapper friendly funding sources. So there's Tiny Seed, Com Fund, there's revenue-based financing like Pipe and Lighter Capital and CapChase and FounderPath and a whole bunch of other options out there. You can even raise an angel round, or I participated in a whole bunch of equity crowdfunding rounds for companies. Huge fan of that because the incentives are aligned to basically you don't have to be a $1 billion company to bust. You can exit or start distributing profits after $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million in ARR instead, which is very achievable and very normal for a lot of SaaS companies to get to. Once you get past about $20 million in ARR, you're like really cream of the crop, exceptional business. And if you're VC, you're just getting started. You need to get to at least to 100, right? So that's where a lot of them fizzle out. They just can't reach that next scale. They can't raise their next round. They're burning too much. So to me, it's a lot more about supporting the lifestyle that I want, seeing cool stuff exist in the world, doing the good work, and not having to really worry about going as fast as I can and trying to go for $1 billion, bust or not. I'm not super financially motivated like that. It's more just about the work itself.
And it's also about what market you're targeting, right? Is if you're venture backed, you really need to have a big market with a lot of money there. But a lot of the products you've made is more specific and targeted to fulfilling a specific niche that people have. If you were to try to broaden that appeal, you might not be solving the problem as well for their actual core customers. And is that something you pick as well when you're choosing these ideas that you're working with the co-founders at the moment, with the technical co-founders? How much are you judging that kind of market size when you're going for those products? Or is it more thinking about like what's the kind of criteria you're using to pick those ideas?
Yeah, and to be clear, there's nothing wrong with going the VC route. I think that you have to know what you're getting into, right? And so this is where we talk about what's the criteria and what makes for a good VC-backed business. I was at a marketing meetup last night, and I was talking to a bunch of people they're creating SaaS for 3D printers in big manufacturing plants, and it's like they have to build so much technology to support basically these robotics manufacturing processes that it's like you're not going to be able to bootstrap that. You'd be building for years and years and years and still have more to build before you even got to market, right? There are definitely certain types of businesses and opportunities that require VC funding where it's either go big or go home. And again, I have nothing wrong with VC. So for me, when I look at opportunities that I want to bootstrap and I think would be a profitable business, I'm mainly looking for wedges where I can be a small player in a big pond, or where we're sort of like a first of our kind and we haven't really seen any other company innovate in the space, maybe because they've either gone bust or because it's a small enough market where it's not attractive to VC-backed companies or to VCs in general. But in general, when I look at opportunities, I try to look at overlap in existing areas that I already know really well. So marketing technology, no code, productivity, B2B SaaS for other B2B SaaS companies, right? SaaS for SaaS, essentially. Those are all spaces that I know really well. I know the playbooks. I know the types of customers. I know the products as well. I'm not going to go try to build and sell some sort of AI modeling software for, data scientists. Like that's just not in my circle of competence, not something I know anything about. And so I'm going to stick to things that are honestly rather simple and that I have connections in. The big thing is like, do I have a network here? Can I ask someone their opinion on this product or the space, this industry, the landscape of tools and technology already out there. Especially for SwipeWell, one of the big factors was I already have an audience on Twitter and with SwipeFiles of tens of thousands of people who I can essentially cross-sell this to. And so one of the things we did early on was I sent an email out to the newsletter and said, hey, I'm working on a SaaS project. Here it is. If you want to check it out, I'm also going to be documenting the whole process of how we build and grow it. Join the waitlist here. Had a little waitlist referral program. I'm documenting it. So like it's very symbiotic, right? We're like SwipeFiles is benefiting from everything I'm doing with SwipeWell, and SwipeWell is benefiting from all these marketers that I can draw from SwipeFiles. So any opportunity, I'm always looking for like what's the kind of advantage that I can have either with my existing audience or a network, and or is this not attractive for VCs to come in and exploit, either because it's a small enough market or because we have some sort of wedge, we have an opinionated way of doing something, we have a differentiator, or we're just really going to carve out this specific feature set, and that's the thing we're going to be leading with that we know is not going to turn into a ginormous opportunity, but it's going to be big enough for us.
Obviously, your background was with the marketing, especially. What are some of the things you've done in the past, or the different tips and tricks you can give people who are looking to grow their own B2B SaaS companies?
Early stage, 0 to 1, it's a grind. To be honest, I don't know why I like it so much, because it's one of the hardest jobs in the world, taking a company from 0 to 1 and really getting that initial first traction with a product that is still rough around the edges and doesn't have feature parity with competitors or the incumbents out there, or has 1,000,001 different indirect or secondary competitors with spreadsheets or different automations you can hack together. And so when you think about early stage growth, I try not to overcomplicate things. I like to start with sales, actually, because I think that if you can find the people, you can talk to them, you can reach out to them one by one, you can easily get your first 100, even a few hundred customers strictly outbound, just one by one, reaching out to your network, doing some prospecting and reaching out. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And then from those learnings of doing the sales process, learning which platforms can actually reach people, who are these people, what kind of messaging do they respond to, then I can scale that with marketing. Let's take all the right catchphrases and subject lines and value propositions that we're emailing back and forth to people. Let's take that and put that on the landing page, because we know it already works, right? And if we see that LinkedIn is working really well for DMs, let's start posting a lot of content on LinkedIn. Let's start running ads on LinkedIn. Let's start, showing up in LinkedIn groups. It's not really a thing anymore, but just for example. So you can kind of scale your marketing strategy out from your sales strategy. Beyond that, the strategies I think that are, so there's some that are very like ubiquitous. SEO is a huge win for basically everyone. Doesn't matter if you're selling to enterprises or if you're selling to, moms and grandmas and or anyone really, pet owners. SEO, everyone's always searching and using Google. It's just everyone's been trained culturally to use it to search for things. And it's the only source of free recurring traffic, which is an absolutely huge advantage, because that literally gives you leverage where you create a piece of content, it can rank for multiple keywords, and then everyone who searches for those keywords gets your article and you get that traffic. Whereas if you're constantly relying on social media or through advertising, it's either pay to play or it's going to be very spiky, where you have to keep putting in more time, keep creating new content in order to get those spikes of traffic. So I always encourage everyone, do sales, do SEO. I'm also a big fan of a lot of the kind of scrappy guerrilla marketing techniques. One of the really fun things we did early on with SavvyCal was a lot of people were saying that they love the product, they give it a trial, they want to switch, but they're already locked into an annual contract with Calendly. And their subscription isn't up for another 3, 6, 9 months. And so they're just going to have to wait until then in order to switch. So just some thinking, kind of let it marinate. Actually, I saw a T-Mobile ad when I was watching TV on Hulu. And I thought about how T-Mobile was the uncarrier and how they had this, like, basically they'll pay you to switch over to T-Mobile. And I thought, how can they do that? How can they literally pay people to switch? And then I was like, oh, it's really just a simple like CAC to LTV kind of equation. Not even CAC to LTV, but really just what is the CAC compared to the revenue generated through having someone on a subscription on one of their plans. And I was kind of doing the math of like, wow, well, if they pay, $600 to buy you off of their contract, and then you pay them $100 a month, they're going to get that back in 6 months anyways. So of course they're going to be paying you to switch to T-Mobile. And I thought, wait a second, what if we do that for Calendly, for SavvyCal customers who want to switch over? So we ran this whole campaign around a Calendly buyout program where we had people forward their receipt from their annual subscription or their invoice over to a specialized email address. We would verify it, and then we would basically credit their account for the exact amount left on their Calendly subscription. Put that into their Stripe account. We say, great, all you have to do is pay for the remaining amount, but we've already credited your account for what you've already paid for Calendly. That way, they're not losing any money. They're not double paying. They're just making a clean switch. And one, it kind of created some buzz around just like, oh, look at this fun thing that SavvyCal is doing. And then people are like, oh, what's SavvyCal? But also it got a lot of those people to switch over finally. And now that I have an excuse, right? All those people who said that before, I'd reach out to them and be like, hey, here's this thing we're doing. If you want to take advantage of this, send it out to the early access lists, send it out on Twitter, and blast it out to the communities. And that worked really, really well. So it's hard to really scale. You can't do that for every product, but there's usually an idea like that where you can be scrappy and kind of do these guerrilla tactics that are a little bit more creative and interesting that will move the needle early on. It might not really move the needle later, but early on, you just have to scrape and claw for every dollar of MRR that you can get and every additional customer. And these things really help to snag those early customers and build some momentum.
What are some of the mistakes you made early on? So you've obviously learned so much over time, but you can't have started at the beginning knowing the information you do now.
Some mistakes? How much time do you have? There's a whole bunch of learnings. I think one of the big things is trying to make a strategy work for a customer base that it just doesn't align with their buying behaviors, essentially. One of the things we really tried to do at Baremetrics for a while was an affiliate program, because I felt like, well, there are so many consultants and agencies and people out there talking about SaaS. Surely some of them would love to promote Baremetrics, and then they can get a lifetime commission check for every customer that they send our way. Turns out that one, that's not really how it's very rare that someone will get a recommendation for revenue analytics software. And then that's like the main decision that they use to choose which one that they go with. But also there just wasn't enough scale for any of those affiliate partners to really make the most out of the affiliate partnership, because consultants are working one-on-one with only a handful of clients at a time. And so at most they're looking at sending over, 10, 20 clients a year, really. Same thing with agencies, except you can double or triple that number. Still not all that much. And then the numbers don't work out in their favor all that much either. So man, we spent a whole bunch of time setting up the affiliate program, a whole bunch of time reaching out to people, a whole bunch of time doing, programs and promotions for affiliates that really, at the end of the day, I kind of just turned around and was like, why are we doing this? I'm just trying to experiment. But if the experiment isn't a good fit for that product and for that company, then I don't need to really test it to invalidate it. I can just cross it off right away. That's sort of one of the, I absolutely love the book Traction by Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Mares. But I feel like people can kind of get in this mindset of I just need to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. I need to go through all 19 traction channels, and we just need to experiment our way to see what works. And it's you don't have to go through all that work. You don't have to make all the mistakes. You can really just look at what makes sense for how do people currently buy software like ours? Where do people currently hang out? What actually makes economical sense for our pricing structure? What do we have the capacity for at this stage of the company? Are we, just starting up? Are we bootstrapped? Are we profitable? Are we VC backed? How much money do we have in the bank? How long do we have? What's the goal we need to hit? There are a lot of different factors that come into play where you can just skip over a lot of those mistakes. So anyways, the affiliate program was one of them. I think I made a mistake in, I'll tell you about one thing that was really funny. There was one time I was working on optimizations for our onboarding at Baremetrics. And I thought, basically what the process goes where you connect your Stripe or Braintree or PayPal or whatever it was, and then we'll import all the data. And then once it's done, then we'll let you into the dashboard and we'll show you your metrics. But there's a 5 to 15 minute kind of loading time where we're syncing all the data, generating all the reports, and it's just a lot of data to process. So I thought, while that's happening, why don't I get people to book a demo with me? Because I had already kind of proven out that if someone booked a demo with me, they were like 33% more likely to become a customer. And so I just was like, well, I'll just see if this works as another way to get more people to book a demo, and then we can increase our conversion rate overall. So we put a little Calendly right there. It was in big, bold letters, optional, book a demo while you're waiting. And then once you generate your metrics, you'll already have a call scheduled for tomorrow to go over, what you see and how you can make the most of it. Well, for some reason, like 80-90% of people thought that it was mandatory and that you had to book a meeting in order to see your metrics. And so they booked a meeting with me, and then it took them back to the same exact page. They booked another meeting with me. And then eventually they got into the dashboard, either ghosted me on the meeting or canceled the meeting. And my calendar was just a total hot mess. And the worst part of it was that I couldn't get the engineers to like swap it back for another like 6 weeks, because there was a big backlog of other changes and things in the development pipeline already. And so for like 6 weeks, it was just absolute calendar hell having to deal with all those, backordered people and people not showing up for stuff and people being mad over support and me having to jump on the intercom and try to make it right and explain what actually was the intention behind it. But yeah, I mean, those are just some of the two mistakes I have on top of mind.
Yeah. And with the first one you mentioned there, it's the whole thing about, I don't need to jump off a cliff to know that's a bad idea. And like sometimes people have this idea like, oh, I need to test everything. It's like, you can just see, like, you could look at your competitors, for example, right? If they've done something similar to what you're trying and it's failed spectacularly, then learn from their lessons. I always think this is a really good idea. It's just learn from your competitors' mistakes. Like, you don't have to make all of the mistakes yourself. And that's kind of a way you can learn faster. And it's been a pleasure to chat to you today, Corey. Where can people listening who are interested in what you're doing and what you're building, where should they go to find out more?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Best place is Twitter at Corey Haines Co. Also, my personal site is CoreyHaines.co, which has a list of all my projects, sort of work in progress, list of links to all the things. SwipeFiles.com, of course, if you want to sign up for the newsletter. It's basically like a couple of emails a week on kind of crazy, but also really practical SaaS marketing tactics and strategies from what I'm seeing. And then there's the membership, of course, as well. So if you're a B2B SaaS founder, indie hacker, developer, first marketing hire at a startup, and you need help on this stuff, there's the membership there. And I only do this for podcast interviews, but if you use the code Entrepreneur's Handbook at the checkout, you'll get half off your first year's membership. And so feel free to see you in there. We'd love to see you in the community.